Hi guys, Sean Alexander here. Welcome to the Relativity Lectures Day 2. I wanted to thank you all for your very insightful responses to my question. Again, the question from yesterday is, what is a second? And so I want to start by answering your questions and then kind of going into what I was getting at in asking that. So the first response I'd like to answer actually comes from Alexander Sr., my dad, and he says it's a unit of measurement of the Earth's daily rotation. Well, sure, we can measure a day. There's 3,600 seconds in an hour times 24 is the number of seconds in a day, and of course, a day is measured by the rotation, the amount of time it takes to do one rotation of the Earth. The one point that this gets at that's really important that I want to bring up is, does that mean that the Earth is the ultimate arbiter of time? Or is the rotation of the Earth the ultimate clock for the entire universe by which all times are to be compared by? And, if not the Earth, maybe why not the rotation of the Earth about the Sun, which would be a year? Or why not the rotation of the Sun about the center of the galaxy? What is the ultimate arbiter of time, or the ultimate clock by which all is compared to? So that brings up a really good point that I want you all to think about. So answer me that. Who is the ultimate timekeeper, or what is the ultimate timekeeper? Question number 2 from Sir William Holland. A second is a universal measurement of time as decided by early thinkers. There's a good point there. A second is one of the smallest units of time measurements commonly used by the layperson. Who's a layperson? It's used to determine the time elapsed for actions such as half-lives of material and chemical reactions. Again, everyone's answer to the question is true. So you're right, but the main point that I think we need to think about from this one is a second is a universal measurement of time as decided by early thinkers, meaning, is it a man-made concept, or is it something with an independently existing reality? That's a key point. Think on that. Next question. Let's see here. Scott Cohen, my friend and colleague. This is my favorite. What is a second? The best helping of ice cream. After that yummy first one, when whet the appetite, and before the third one gives you brain freeze and walloping stomachache. That is hilarious. And not quite as ridiculous as it sounds, I would like to bring up a quote from Einstein when they asked him to explain his theory of relativity to the layperson. He said that it's simple. When you're kissing a pretty girl, 1 second can go, time can go by instantaneously, but when you're sitting on a hot stove, 1 second can seem like an eternity. That's the answer from the man himself. So there's something to that. Last one that I'm going to do today was the most insightful answer I've ever heard in my life, coming from 16-year-old Kayla. This is great, guys. You got to hear this one. My definition of a second is this. A second is a period in space and time that was given a definition by humans to measure time in a somewhat inaccurate but relative way that our minds could comprehend. Who's this person? It's like Yoda said this. I'm going to read it one more time. A second is a period in space and time that was given a definition by humans to measure time in a somewhat inaccurate but relative way that our minds could comprehend. Damn, good answer, Kayla. Okay, so thanks for your responses. Again, one of the big takeaways I want you to have from today is who or what is the ultimate clock by which all other times are measured. And then the other one is this: how do we measure a second? This is the big one. How do we actually do it? And I'm going to remove the word clock from your vocabulary. You just can't say with a stopwatch. That doesn't really say anything. How do we measure a second? Well, what you could say is, when we think of a clock, you can tell me about how a clock works. We have a rotating thing, right? Well, maybe you could say that it's a rotating object, and we've all agreed on the rate of rotation, and it's the amount of time that it takes to rotate 1/60th of the way around the circle. But the big takeaway I want you to, so I want you to answer, how can you measure a second? And don't just say "cuz clock," that doesn't say anything. What I want you to notice in the description I use, you can see how a clock works, is we need to define some sort of motion with which to everyone can compare, right? So basically we use a simple wall clock. What do we have? We all have a rotating thing where we've all agreed to set the rotation rate the same, and then we define a second as the amount of time it takes to do 1/60th of a rotation. But again, the main takeaway that I want you to see is that we need to define some sort of motion before we can say anything regarding to time. And then the last thing to think about while I throw that in there, I don't know if you've heard of absolute zero, but that's the temperature. If you could get temperature to zero, which you can't, but basically that would mean that all the molecules were frozen completely, no motion whatsoever. If everything was totally non-moving, frozen down to the molecular level, would time have any meaning or an independent existence? So that's another thing I want you to think about. Okay, so just to recap, here's what I want you to answer. One, what is the ultimate motion from which we measure all time? Is it the rotation of the Earth or something else that's the ultimate arbiter of time? Two, how do you measure a second? How would you measure a second and define it that way? So we're going to now go from the definition to how do you measure it. Okay, good luck with that. I can't wait to hear your responses. That was super fun, and I will see you mañana.